Good. How are you?
I'm good. So before you came on, and I was just saying that you're somebody that I would have loved to have talked to when I was running, but for political reasons, it just was not a smart move to be on for me to go on RT.
Yeah. I kind of that's also why I don't push people. I've had in the past I've had people offer to get connect me with Tulsi Gabbard and some others, and I'm kind of like if they're dying to come on, fine, but like I get it. Like we live in a crazy neo McCarthyist world right now, and people are idiots, and so it can be used against someone.
So talk a little bit. I mean, I know you come from stand up, and before we talk anything about like that, so I was just on your wiki and you
I don't know how accurate it is.
all right, well, we're going to find out. You were in a Law and Order SVU episode.
Yeah, that's my real claim to fame.
That is to me. Like, seriously, now I'm impressed. Now I am really impressed.
Yeah. Excuse me. Oh, you bring back the past. Yeah, I was like 25 years old, and back then I was doing more kind of standard stand-up comedy and a little more standard, less political. And I kind of just wanted to get on TV and do the acting thing, get a sitcom, the standard path for a successful comedian if I could get there. But I quickly got tired of saying other people's words, and auditioning is just. I mean, my heart goes out to actors who have to go. You go out to audition after audition after audition, and Hollywood tells you no because they don't like your haircut, or you delivered one word wrong, or whatever it is, whatever their reason is. And it's such a garbage thing. I mean, yeah, you can end up getting something you really enjoy, but it is a crapshoot together. So I mean, I'd always been more into stand-up. That had been my main thing. So I continue to focus on stand-up because it's one of the few art forms left where you can say whatever the hell you want on a stage with people listening, and really kind of have your own freedom.
Well, and I think that's a huge distinction that I always make between people that are, say, comedians and musicians versus people that are actors. Because, when somebody's an actor, I know people that have crushes on all these actors. Like, how do you even know who that person, like, they're only pretending to be someone else. Where when you're dealing with comedians and musicians, it's more like you're writing your own self. Like where your art comes from is yourself, as opposed to pretending to be somebody else. So I think I think those are very different things.
Yeah, you definitely learn a lot more about somebody when they're a comedian than when they're an actor. So we most comedians really let people into their lives. I mean, my stuff has never been that personal. My stand-up comedy is maybe in the George Carlin vein, that kind of style where it's
the best though. He's the best.
Cultural criticism and criticism of our world, and I'll make passing references to my real life, but it's just not where I've found the things that seem to be the most important to me, the things that I find most fascinating to talk about. So I have great respect for other comedians where it's kind of all about their life, but that's just never been my thing.
Yeah. Also, I mean, how could anybody's life be remotely as entertaining as the circus that we live in? Like there's so much good, like there is just so much good fodder. Like my personal life is extremely boring. Like there's nothing that exciting here, and it's like laundry and cleaning up after dogs. And it's just not that, but the political circus, that's entertainment.
Yeah, it very much is. And I've always, ever since I was a kid, I had a thing about like when you find out you're being lied to, that makes me incredibly angry. And so, as I slowly unraveled that, we're being lied to like 24/7 by every media outlet in one way or another, by just about every politician. And it really kind of drove this anger, which to me was, most of my comedy comes from some level of anger. So it was kind of an inexhaustible well of material for anger.
And it's interesting. I was thinking of this beforehand, that it's a little ironic that our comedians have become more like journalists, and our journalists are completely laughable. Like never, obviously they're not comedians because they suck at it, but they're definitely laughable. And it's like, who are real journalists? Which brings me to, I was hoping we could talk about Julian Assange. I don't know if that's like, it's a very big thing for me. And nobody is really talking about it in mainstream media, which obviously we know why. And it's very scary. I mean, this is the extradition of him, to me, is the death of the First Amendment in this country.
Yeah, I mean, it's like those who speak the truth have been persecuted in our country for a long time, but this would be a definite new level. I mean, a journalist prosecuted under the Espionage Act, and he's not even American, and he's never operated from America, and we reserve the right to just grab anybody around the world that reveals the truth of our empire. I mean, it really is horrifying, and it really is a new level. And to go back to your last question about why are the comedians the journalists now, in some some good examples, and I think it probably has to do with a lot of comedians have a tendency to want to speak their mind and want to speak, say whatever they want to say, and not be held back. Because that stand-up comedy really is an art form that thrives on I can say whatever the hell I want, and that is one of the things we value in this country. Now, that doesn't mean they haven't tried to stop some comedians from doing it. I mean, Lenny Bruce was largely, he died of a drug overdose, but it was largely due to the fact that they had crushed his life and taken his ability to perform away sheerly and purely for the things he had said. He had
all content.
All the content that upset people because it was going after religion and going after the country and the government and things like that. But yeah, so I think that stand-up comedy specifically has a long tradition of people really speaking the truth and not being held back. Whereas if you're talking about the mainstream media, at least, they don't get to that position unless they've learned to play the game, unless they've learned to say what fits with their corporate masters. And comedians won't generally do that, or most of them won't. But
yeah, and then you look at people like Bill Maher, and you think
there are exceptions.
And you think, oh, how far they have fallen.
Yeah. I mean, and the one that, Bill Maher has always come off as a bit of a charlatan and a bit of a snake oil salesman to me, but the one that really I find upsetting is John Oliver, because I used to know him, and I'm sure to this day he's one of the nicest guys. He's one of the funniest writers I've ever seen, and my interactions with him were always very nice. But I don't know whether he's told to say it or he's just dumb enough to read every Reuters article and think that's all the truth that can ever be had. But his segments, just feeding into the garbage propaganda against China, against Venezuela, or against Jill Stein is really troublesome, to say the least.
He's still he still works for corporate America. He still works for that narrative. It's unfortunate. I think a lot of people were stunned when we first met the real Stephen Colbert, not Colbert from the Colbert Report, but the actual Stephen. And I think that it's a very similar thing. Like when we find somebody's comedy funny, we kind of necessarily assume, oh, they're cool, they're progressive. No, not necessarily. Not necessarily.
Right. And I heard this actually isn't that long ago. This interview might have been a year ago or something, but Colbert was, he was asked about what people expected from him and things like that. And he said, me and John, meaning Jon Stewart, used to joke about how people just can't get it in their heads that we're not trying to create change. We're just making fun of stuff. We don't have a desire to become a player in shifting society. I feel like I learned that about those guys a while back, but Jon Stewart.
I was going to say, I can't believe he would speak for Jon Stewart, because Jon Stewart actually has been working pretty hard, doing all sorts of cool things post his time.
Yeah. Jon Stewart, I think, does want to create change, as we saw with the 9/11 responders bill, but it not on a grand enough level.
No.
I was talking about this with some journalist friends recently, and that the point that I think a lot of people got very disenchanted with what Jon Stewart and Colbert might achieve was the Rally for Sanity, where they brought 1 million people, mostly young people, out to the mall in Washington D.C. And the final conclusion of the day was basically go home and be nice. Stop rocking the boat. Stop getting upset. Just go be nice to each other. And I was like, that is not going to create the change we need.
No, they're definitely not revolutionaries. They're not leading the charge. And it's unfortunate because those are people that have the biggest platforms that could be of use in that way.
Yeah.
I mean, it's, it's unfortunate. And the other thing I wanted to ask you was about like where the journalists now? Like are there any? Where are the journalists?
I'd say that the ones I respect are alternative outlets that are not mainstream media, not funded by corporate America.
That's the
It's
key
places
thing.
like-
That's the key thing.
Yeah.
Where are they funded? Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. It's places like the Gray Zone, Popular Resistance. There are some other good ones, but I agree they are few and far between. Consortium News used to be Truth Dig, but it's gone now. And so there are some places, but people have to hunt them down and find them, and they need to actually. I try and say this I've been doing daily YouTube videos. People need to not be lazy, and they need to go and search for this stuff, because the truth is my stuff that I'm posting is getting to very few people now, despite the fact that I have a massive Facebook following. They're not showing it to anyone. I have a large YouTube following. They're not showing those to anyone. So it really comes down to whether people are going to be active and decide I need to go get this information. And unfortunately, like even wonderful people that have their head on straight, many of us are lazy at the end of the day. Oh, this has been popped up as the next thing to read. Well, then I'll just read that.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. And I think that we have a lot more people that are misinformed more so than uninformed. And I think that that's what's really scary. And even well-intentioned people, they'll just get up, they'll put on their news, they'll put on their CNN, they'll watch it. They think they're very informed, and
Yep.
they just get whatever the corporate talking points are. And it's sad because a lot of people, it's been gradual. Like I remember Rachel Maddow on Air America with Ed Schultz.
I listen to that all the time.
And so, for somebody, let's say, who's been like watching her, maybe it's happened gradually that you haven't noticed, like I try to think of like how that happens, because it really is very black and white from where she used to be.
Yeah, I mean, I try and remember whether I was I was a little politically different there back then, but whether she was that much better or whether I was just that much wrong. And whether I have continued to inform myself and, read the important people and grow, and she has gone the other direction to full-time corporate America, just, creating coups around the world, manufacturing consent for our endless bombing. I mean, it's kind of hilarious because I was in a bookstore and I picked it up because it seemed odd. She wrote a book in like 2012 called Drift, I think.
Yes, I read it.
You read it? And it was about how the military has like gone off the rails, and now she's the one manufacturing consent for those wars.
Yes, I did read that book, and it was about the complete military industrial complex and how our young people are basically being used as fodder for profit. That was essentially the concept of that book. Yes, I had forgotten about that. Wow.
Yeah, and it's like, how does she not see the difference between what she does on that show, getting paid $30,000 an episode to manufacture consent for our wars, and what she wrote in that book?
Well, it's funny because she actually was our Bootlicker of the week this week with her tweet about prayers for Trump and Melania. It was very Bootlicker.
That's touching. I shed a tear for Trump and Melania. No, I mean, to me, that moment, more than maybe a lot recently, showed how much full of crap, and how at the end of the day, this is all a big club of oligarchs and you're not in it. It was like, how do you tell us? You try and tell us every day. And look, I am no Trump fan. I think he's a megalomaniacal, narcissistic man-child and equivalent war criminal to past presidents. But they try and tell us on all these, the neoliberal stations that he's a dictator, he's a Russian asset, he's a Turkish asset, he's North Korean asset, he's destroying the democracy of America. And then the following day they go, but pray for his safety. What? One of those can't be true. Pick which side.
Well, that just really goes to show you we are so much more concerned with feelings, and certainly the neoliberals, they're so much more concerned with being politically correct. And I mean, like, I don't wish like bad things on anyone, especially people that get followed into office by Mike Pence. Those are not people we should wish bad things on. But actually, at this point in time, they have a very short term left. I really don't think it would make one bit of difference either way.
Well, and yeah, I mean, the other thing is there's a difference between, wishing harm on someone,
Yeah.
like, man, I hope that guy dies, and just not running around and saying, please deliver your prayers to our dear leader. To me, it's just so disgusting. But you're right that in fact, a lot of people don't like to talk about this because we've been told that Trump is this singular and unique threat to America that has never existed before. But Pence would, in many of the ways, would be equally harmful in most of the ways that they're upset about. And he'd actually probably be able to achieve it more quickly because he has a better relationship with the Republicans in Congress and a better ability to get things done than this kind of maniac who changes his mind every 3 seconds.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, he's sort of the Stepford evangelical version of Trump's policy. Like, that's just it. It's just, and really, I always said, people want to get rid of Trump. You better be taking Pence with him because he ain't a prize. Let me tell you. And quite honestly, where we are now, I'm looking at down the line at Nancy Pelosi, and I'm thinking, oh, good God, no. Like that's where, I mean, we're not getting anywhere better here.
Yeah. Well, as California's on fire, she said, well, whatever, the green dream or whatever it's called. She has no care for the environment. Meanwhile, people are, the outside tastes like burning now.
Yeah.
And you think that's not a sign that we need to change our ways?
It's amazing. I mean, look, what we know, and this is something I've noticed for a while, we have a completely non-functioning republic. Because if you had a functioning republic, then your policies would reflect the majority of the people. That, by definition, would be a functioning democratic republic. And so we clearly don't have that. We have people sitting in office with lower approval ratings than even like 18%, even lower than that. We have laws that do not represent the will of the people. So at this point, it's interesting to me that there's still such this push for participation in this, what is really a failed republic.
Yeah, I think increasingly, and maybe we're nearing 100%. The Congress, and to some degree even the presidency, but let's stick with Congress. The Congress is just a show of the idea that Americans are choosing what's happening in our country. But between the gridlock and the fact that they agree on 80%, 90% of the core issues of our country, does it really change depending on Congress? I mean, nothing. The exploitation of Wall Street against 90% of Americans doesn't change. The unfettered military-industrial complex goes on without alteration, no matter what it seems, no matter which president's in there. And so many of these things, 80, 90% of the core issues that really matter to the day-to-day lives of your average American stay the same, no matter who gets into those spots. That doesn't mean there aren't a few good progressives in there that are trying their best, but in general, the Congress just serves as this kind of like token, like, look, your votes matter. Meanwhile, the system goes ahead no matter what.
Yeah, I mean, that's ultimately what I'm trying to do, is transform this concept of politics into service, because that's really what it's supposed to be. And, we focus a lot on local races, on things that are happening locally, because actually those do affect people's lives every day. So I think that a lot of people get very caught up with the presidency because it's just such a circus at this point. I mean, it's somewhat embarrassing. Like I'm kind of glad that I'm not traveling because of COVID right now, because it's like we are at the uber embarrassing. Like I would probably stitch a Canadian flag on my luggage if I were traveling right now. Like that would be, I mean, I think Trump represents us perfectly.
Yeah, I know. Well, and that's something I tried to say tried to get across in my last comedy special, is that Trump is not the cause of most of these problems. He is a symptom. He is the boil that rises up, and you can go, ooh, gross. That's what's wrong with America. But he didn't create climate change. He didn't create white supremacy in this country. He didn't create the policing system and the war on drugs that has imprisoned so many.
No,
He didn't
Joe Biden did.
Yeah, I know Joe Biden actually is more responsible for this stuff. I was going to say the next one was going to be, he didn't create the unlimited surveillance of American citizens, but Joe Biden bragged about writing the Patriot Act. So yeah, Trump did not create these things. He is just the representation of a completely failed system.
He's the mushroom that comes out of the ground at the very tail end of the fungus.
Yeah.
That's how he
I
is.
think we can put the fun back in fungus.
He's just, you know what? He just offends them. He's so offensive. And that's actually the stuff that doesn't bother me about him. Like, I don't have this rule about decorum. I care about policy. Yeah. Right. So like, if he was getting us out of wars and giving stimulus checks out and supporting Medicare for all, I wouldn't care who he grabbed by what or was talking about, quite honestly.
Well, I would care who he grabbed, because that's assault. But
no, I mean, but when you're just talking about like locker room talk, like, and he's just saying, this is what I did, like, that's not the kind of stuff that should be bothering us.
Right. And they actually, they being the kind of ruling elite, including the media, they use that decorum, this let's be nice to each other, as a cover so that we don't actually discuss the real issues. We don't get to the bottom of it. It is by design a distraction, or a fog and mirrors to cover over the reality. I mean, it's why they don't show photos of flag draped coffins coming home anymore. It's why, despite the fact that American soldiers are in bombing in 7 countries, that we basically never see footage from almost any of it, with some very few exceptions, because it has to be covered up. Even if we know it exists, it has to be covered up. And so that's what that decorum does. It makes things seem polite, they're so horrified that Trump would say mean things about John McCain. And it's like, I would rather someone say mean things about John McCain and be actually anti-war, which Trump is not, but be actually anti-war, than just pretend to say nice things about John McCain, covering over our belligerence that is endless.
Well, I mean, and what's interesting is when Trump ran, he ran on an anti-war, somewhat populist worker platform. He hasn't done any of those things. And when he is a couple of times in office made comments, oh, we're getting out of Syria. We're getting out of, and then of course the left attacks him from the right. And it's like, you can't just get out of Syria. How are you just going to get out of Syria? Look, Assad chemically bombed his own people and blah, 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 blah. And it's really weird that is supposed to be the left.
Well, I don't call them the left. I call them liberals or neoliberals, but they are to the right of Donald Trump and some Republicans on our factors of war, or our war machine. And I mean, it really shows they've succeeded at kind of taking over the entire political establishment. Neither the Democrats or Republicans stand for peace, stand for dealing with climate change truly, stand for environmental anything, stand for giving everyone health care. I mean, Joe Biden proudly says he's not for Medicare for all, proudly says he doesn't support the Green New Deal.
Won't ban fracking.
Yeah, so it's really a successful game they've played on America, that we're supposed to treat these as two completely separate parties that don't agree on anything. It's like, no, actually they agree on most things. I always say, people, now there's a lot always talk about what's going to happen if there's going to be a third party. Where's that going to come from? How do you feel about a third party? Would you be part of a third party? All these questions. And I'm always thinking, I'd be happy if we had a second. We don't have a labor party. And that's really what this comes down to. We have 2 corporate management parties. One is just politically correct and is nicer about LGBTQ issues. But they're both corporate parties. So we have nobody representing labor. And I think ultimately that is the problem. Yeah, and if you ever seen that chart, which basically is two lines, it's the percentage of America in labor unions, and as that goes down, inequality just skyrockets.
Of
They
course.
really correlate almost perfectly. Well, inversely correlate. And yeah, you need somebody to represent labor. Obviously there are third parties out there that get mercilessly attacked and beaten down and kicked out and off the ballots and everything else in order to stop Americans from thinking they have any choice outside of these two parties. One that is definitely doing interesting stuff is the Movement for a People's Party, which Nick Brana helped create. And they've talked a lot about labor, and he's actually been meeting with labor leaders. And they're not, MPP is not running a presidential candidate this time around. So I think for those who are interested, who know they're going to vote in this presidential race, but are interested in learning beyond just that, MPP is doing interesting things. But it's an incredibly massive uphill battle. I mean, you're going to get no media coverage whatsoever.
I know.
And you're going to have the hardest time in the world to get on any of these ballots.
Yeah, it's pathetic. And, it's something that's always concerned me is I don't have like any sort of personal, like, I don't mind that there's parties. I think that there's a place for that. What bothers me is how they control the election mechanism. See, I don't think that the private clubs should control the electoral process. I think that it should be like, okay, this is the candidate we like. This is who we want to, put up there. But the process should be a completely independent function of those private clubs.
And that's how the U.S. ended up being what a large Harvard study called the worst democracy in the Western world. I mean, we are not first in democracy. We are very low on that list, as you've experienced firsthand. And whether it's the fact that our touchscreen machines are largely completely unaccountable, or like you're saying, that the people have a massive bias while they're running these systems. There's many levels that show how poor our system is and how other countries are doing it much better. I mean, it's hilarious as the two corporate parties in the mainstream media attack Venezuela because they act like that's not a democracy. Meanwhile, Venezuela has far more legitimate elections than we do.
I know. And nobody here, of course, understands that. And Venezuela is definitely a hot issue down here in South Florida. It's, obviously, I'm not going to be on the same side as my Congresswoman, Debbie Wasserman Schultz. She's extremely pro Guaido and supports the complete takeover of a sovereign country.
Right, which is pro coup. I mean, let's just call it what it is. At least they should be honest and come out and say, "Hey, we're coup mongers." And at least then I'd be like, "All right, at least they're telling people the truth."
But something interesting that I learned campaigning and canvassing down here is that for a large amount of the Venezuelan population that are in favor of regime change, which are clearly our wealthier white Venezuelans. And that's just what it is. I mean, that's the corporate class. They are in favor of that. And that's a huge portion of the Venezuelans in my district. And they do live specifically in Weston. They call it Westonzuela. That's where Debbie lives. And they support that. But what I have come to realize, because I'm not going to say that I support that when I don't support that, is they actually don't mind that you don't support Guaido. As long as you don't sing praises of Maduro, they kind of just, they kind of don't mind it. And so I was able to just be my truth and say what I think. And I don't think it affected me in any negative way. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it's outrageous.
Yeah, I mean, you will talk to plenty of Venezuelans living in America who say Maduro's horrible and we have to get rid of him or whatever. And it's like, well, that is the viewpoint of usually Venezuela is wealthy enough to get to America.
Exactly.
That is most of the ones you're going to end up talking to. And I didn't see this coverage from anyone except Greg Palast, but about how the racial aspect, which you kind of just mentioned, of this whole, let's destroy Venezuela and put in a new, or a return to their oligarchy that they used to have before Chavez, is that if you look at photos of the Guaido supporting contingent and the Maduro supporting contingent, there is a clear skin color difference. One is darker. And there's a reason for that. They want to go back to a time when the whiter people ran Venezuela.
Yeah, it is. It's definitely a class thing. And unfortunately, a lot of the people here have no clue about that. They don't know that because, like you said, the majority of people that you might meet here from Venezuela are people that were wealthy enough to get out. I mean, and can afford to leave, which is not an easy thing to do. I have a very good friend who's stuck in Venezuela, got deported there horribly, and has been stuck there for now over 2 years trying to get back. And not only once you get deported, then we have to punish you. Then we have to say you were naughty for being here when you weren't allowed, and now you can't come back for 10 years.
Wow.
There's like a 10-year punishment penalty on being here seeking asylum if you weren't properly So, but yeah, I mean, it's horrible. It's horrible. And we have a bias towards believing whatever the corporate narrative is. And in this case, it's a seemingly pro-coup narrative.
Yeah, I mean, here's the thing. It's like, even if you really despise Maduro, like a lot of people in America despise Trump, you should still, we don't, even if you despise Trump, we're not pleading with foreign countries to invade us or to bomb us. Or, Canada and Mexico, do you have the economic power to crush our country so that people can't get medication or food? And hopefully that will knock Trump out of power.
You're giving us some really good ideas. Like, that actually sounds really good.
Pleading for that is utter insanity if you care about the people in this country at all. And so that's what drives me nuts, is like, you don't have to love Maduro to not want to crush average people in Venezuela to have your way.
Right. And we know that it's about natural resources. I mean, if Venezuela wasn't sitting on natural resources, we wouldn't care one way or the other about them.
Yeah, natural resources and socialism, the threat, as Chomsky called it, the threat of the good idea. Every time a country gets socialism and then, cuts their poverty, I believe under Chavez, it was extreme poverty cut by 70%, poverty cut by 50%. Those numbers in America would be incredible, groundbreaking. To cut extreme poverty by 70%, it's crazy. But it's the threat of the good example. If that kind of thing were to spread, all of a sudden America would be afraid that, oh my God, what if those kind of things come to the US? And this is not saying that everything's perfect in Venezuela. I know a lot of people are struggling there, but it's tough to separate the people struggling there because of something Maduro did and the people suffering there because of our economic sanctions. I mean, we have economically really destroyed that country. We've cut off their biggest resource, which is oil, and we've cut off a bunch of other things like medications from getting in. So how can you say, oh, it's just Maduro's fault when we're economically got our boot on their throats?
Right. And then we turn around and say, yeah, it's socialism. See, it's a problem because of the socialism is the problem.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that's probably keeps any of the people their head above any amount of water, is the fact that there is this social aspect to their economy. Yeah. And they get healthcare also, I would point out.
They get healthcare, they get free college. There's a lot of free housing. I remember I'd covered the free college in Venezuela once on my show, and I had someone comment in the comment section and said, I live in Venezuela. University is not actually free. You have to pay this many, bolivars or whatever they're called, their dollar, in order to attend. And I did so I went to currency translator and I translated the currency. It was $1, a US dollar. You have to pay a US dollar a semester.
Which is probably like whatever the fee is to keep your name in the list in the computer or whatever it is.
It's not free. It costs $1.
I mean, it is pitiful that we sell ourselves as some like beacon of we're the great white hope of democracy.
Yeah. As you can see by how we've dealt with this pandemic.
So the pandemic, coming full circle with Trump getting the pandemic, I think it's like, no, you don't wish it on somebody, but karma's kind of a bitch.
Where'd that come from? Yeah, it is definite karma, I think. But to me, like, whatever. It seemed likely he was going to get it because he's not taking any precautions. But to me, what the real story is him running around saying, look, it's no big deal. Don't let it dominate your life. And he has a level of medical care that even most middle-class Americans could never even imagine. I mean, experimental drugs, they've got him pumped full of steroids. He's medevaxed 20 minutes away like he couldn't get by in a car. It's just the level of care, which I get it. You're going to give that level of care to the president, but that's also the level of care that some of the richest people in America are going to get. And so that is why we're seeing the people dying from this pandemic in America are largely poorer people, people of color. And it's also because they don't even want to go to the hospital. They're afraid they're going to get saddled with thousands of dollars of debt if they just show up and say, why am I coughing? So they stay home and some of them die. Like it's really tragic. But of course, that's not what the media is talking about.
But it really goes to the fact that why do we have so many vulnerable people with pre-existing conditions? And that goes directly to our healthcare system here, even just pre-COVID. You know, when people don't take good care of themselves, don't have good nutrition. And that's look, we have things that are allowed in our food in this country that aren't allowed, that are banned products in the UK, that are chemicals that are not allowed in their food. So we do a whole bunch of things in this country that kind of poison our food source that I think
Next, you're going to tell me
what?
Next, you're going to tell me that snorting McDonald's Big Macs every day is not something I should be doing. Why are you taking away my freedom, Jen?
I know. I just think that we don't care that much about health and safety for regular people here. So we could conceivably have a population that isn't as vulnerable as it is if we had a healthier, more informed people.
Yeah, more informed, but and I think you started to get to this. It also has to do with money. I mean, a head of broccoli at Whole Foods costs what the equivalent of a entire family's worth of food from McDonald's.
Yeah, crappy food is cheaper.
So yeah, you get to a point, and you know you don't have to be rich, but you kind of got to be middle class to eat healthy. At least. And so, you know, most of the poorer people in America are going to get the cheapest food, which is the worst for them. And something else that even when people have this discussion that we're having right now, something else people don't get to is why is a McDonald's hamburger, I think it's still like $1 or $1.29. Well, let's see. The cow takes years to raise, thousands of gallons of water. It's shipped across the country, if not around the world. How is it $1? Well, it's subsidized. The externalities of that production are subsidized, are paid for by our government, or just when it comes to pollution, they just allow it, right? Corporations can pollute all they want, but if you were to piss in a person's water supply, now that's illegal. But if corporations do it, then it's fine. So, you know, our government and our country really subsidize only the unhealthy stuff, not the stuff that is good for people.
Right. I mean, well, we do. We have not learned. It's funny, as a parent, you learn about like sticks and carrots. It's not a very complicated theory. You know, you reward good behavior, you penalize bad behavior. And we do that backwards. I mean, we subsidize all the wrong things because we have to. I mean, I just figure there's got to be a way to switch it and profitize the good things. Like that, you got to just profitize the good things, and then people will be more interested in those.
Well, I think that'd be a good step in the right direction, but I think eventually you'd have to get away from the profit motive because, you know, you could, let's say you subsidized healthy foods and things like that, we'd still be producing it in a completely unsustainable way. It still has to do with shipping it around the world and all this insanity. So eventually you'd have to get past the profit motive. But yeah, I'd be all for subsidizing healthy food instead of just McDonald's. But what that comes down to largely is that McDonald's is hugely powerful. The ag industry, the big ag industry is hugely powerful. So again, Congress is not just bought by big oil. They're bought out by big ag and, you know, big tech and so many other large entities that they just do their bidding.
Yeah. Down here, we've got big sugar is a big one. And,
right. Yeah.
And it's a big source of, we have a big blue-green algae problem, red tide issues, a lot of industrial agricultural problems. But I am definitely someone who supports the idea of local sustainability. I love the idea of having urban farms. We now have it down here where people can use their front lawns for growing food. Because of course,
Yeah, I support rewilding. Just let your yard go nuts.
well, I live in an HOA, so that's not going to fly here. But I I love the idea of everybody, like sustainability. I love the idea of co-ops. I mean, my dream is to live in the mountains in Asheville in this like farm co-op. And I mean,
Oh yeah.
yeah.
Asheville's doing it right. I think Asheville's, filled with all these wonderful people and hippies and everything, and they, compost and all that stuff. I think what Asheville needs to do is build a wall around the city to keep out America.
It's true. I mean, and it's like, I'm so happy there when I'm there. It's so good. Any day of the week, I could tell you where the tailgate produce is. And it's just so easy. And you don't have to refrigerate the eggs because they're not sprayed with chemicals. And it's so good there.
Right.
It's so good there. So before we wrap up, I just want to ask you, what does the idea of generational change mean to you?
Oh man. Well, I think we are in desperate. We're kind of at a fork in the road. I mean, if we continue down this path, the environmental collapse is coming very quickly. The biodiversity has collapsed. The wildlife is, we've apparently killed like 50% of all wildlife over the past 40 years. So we're at this fork in the road, and to create generational change, we have to make drastic change right now, and then teach the next generations to stay down that path. Because if we want to have generational change, we also have to have future generations.
That's right. No, I know. Yeah, the Green Deal or whatever that is, like as if, and she says it like it's an option, like that there's the option to not do something. Like we could just choose to not address that.
Yeah, it's really not an option. I mean, we're getting past that, and there are definitely places where I see hope. So many people are seeing through this crap coming out of our mainstream media, the crap coming out of Congress. Especially younger people are support environmental change. Creating a sustainable world. I think most people under 30 get it. And so it's really just a matter of taking this country kicking and screaming to a place that will long-term help it a lot.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where it's going to happen. Like you say, it might be kicking and screaming, but progress is going to happen. It always does. It's not necessarily going to be easy to get there, but it's going to happen. We will have single payer healthcare. Like these things will happen. Yeah. It's just a matter of how many people have to suffer before it does happen.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you so much for coming on. I so appreciate it. What's it like being on that side?
The side ain't bad. You did a good job, and I had a lot of fun. And if anybody wants to check out my stuff, it's the main place to go. The main hub is leecamp.com. I have the TV show. I've got web exclusive videos. I got a new book out. And my comedy special is also free at leecampamerican.com.